Hello everyone, welcome back. You're watching Empyrion Galactic Survival episode 147. I'm Igneous, and today we're starting with the structural detailing on the Heracles. I've been talking about this for a while, how we were going to focus on getting the main structure in place, and then we would go back around and do a bunch of detailing on the outer hull to make it look a little bit more interesting, because right now it's just a lot of flat surfaces. And I mean, the overlapping bits kind of look interesting. A little bit more interesting than just a plain flat surface, but it still needed, or at least it wanted, a little bit more than that. So this specific area that I'm working on is on the starboard side of the ship, the right side of the ship. We have this lateral thruster bank. You can see on the sort of the top part of the screen. And I just had this idea fairly recently that I wanted to put something in front of those thrusters, sort of like a cowl or a shroud or something along those lines, if you get the idea. Again, not because it's a functional element, not because it's going to add any significant amount of protection to the ship and prevent the thrusters from taking damage, because it won't. But because it seemed like this part needed something extra, and this was an opportunity to incorporate that in a way that kind of makes sense, as long as you don't try and force it to make sense, if that makes any sense at all. Too much making sense and not making sense at the same time. It's bad for your health. I had just sort of a general idea going in of what I wanted, which was basically the front sort of thing that's got a bit of a curve and almost seems to wrap around a little bit, and then the side pieces kind of tapering off. And after I got the original pieces in place, I realized that it was tapering off a little bit too fast. So I just kind of built it out a little bit more, extended it a little bit, put the 22.5-degree slopes back in, and it worked a little bit better based on what I was hoping for and what I was expecting for this. And then as I was looking at it, I realized from this sort of angle, which would be a pretty common angle to be viewing the ship from, it still needed a little bit more. So I put in these curved sections so that now no matter what direction you're looking at it from, it's a little bit more interesting than simply just a flat wall on the side of the ship with some thrusters sticking out of it. So I was actually quite pleased with the way that it turned out. Very, very simple and straightforward. Not difficult to build, not costly to build, and it meets the requirements, the reason why it was built in the first place. So now we're just kind of finishing off a little bit of the detailing on the inside, because it is so readily visible. I was talking in a previous episode how even the areas of the ship that aren't so visible, I was still trying to finish those off and get those looking smooth and finished, because you've got so much glass in so many different places where you can be looking at the inside of the ship from. It was not a good idea in my mind to leave it with the assumption, nobody will ever see that. So now that's sort of been one of the elements, one of the things that I've been thinking about as I go through this process of setting all of this up and getting the designs done, and the ideas as they come to me, sort of get that sort of added little thing, make sure that it's complete from every reasonable angle, because you never know. You never know when someone's going to come along and say that looked like crap on the inside because it wasn't ever finished. This being another example. Finishing it off in texturing what I had built and looking at the sides and realizing they were just very dull and flat, which was kind of the opposite of what I was hoping for. So by coming along like this and just kind of adding a little bit of a taper around the edges and thickening the side walls a little bit, it again gives it that more complete look to it. It's not a functional thing, it's just it looks better overall. And we're starting to do a little bit of painting as well, and you're going to get a sneak peek at the color scheme that's going to be working around the rest of the ship. We're going to be keeping the dark gray that comes with that sort of semi-gloss texture that we've been using for the shiny metal, as I like to call it. But for the structural detail that we're adding, black and green, because for some reason I got it in my head that I wanted the ship to look like a terrifying alien vessel, and there's nothing more terrifying in an alien vessel than green. Red is creepy, but green is gross. That's kind of the whole idea behind it. And we're back in the rear thruster cluster, as I've taken to calling it. This was something as we were building it out, and especially as we were revising it after the first build, that I had mentioned. We have this back section that's just absolutely flat, with the exception of the thrusters sticking out of it, and that just wasn't going to work for me. We've got all this detail put on the front of the cluster. That worked, just kind of making things a little more 3D, I guess is the easiest way to describe it. I like the way that that turned out, and decided to do something similar on the back end here as well. And it's the same idea. It's not functional. It's not something that needed to be done. It's not something that we can expect to add any kind of performance benefit to the ship at all. It's just making things look a little bit more interesting. This will probably end up just being left the dark gray, because it's already got so much going on the back end here that I don't really feel the need to kind of do a whole lot of extra coloring and texturing and things of that nature. We've already got these giant thrusters, and then you can see the central section here where I wasn't 100% sure when I got to this part exactly what I wanted to do. The thought occurred to me of just doing some sort of like combat steel detail structure kind of thing sticking out the back end, making it a little bit more 3D. And as I started to fill it in, you can see here we almost completely filled it in. We've got one little hole left in the middle, and I realized that that's just, I mean, it's only slightly more interesting than having it flat on the back, and overall just wasn't really that interesting at all. I didn't find. So it took me a couple of minutes of just messing around here. You can see I put some cubes down and I thought, no, those cubes don't need to be there. And then the thought occurred to me that maybe I would be happiest with some of these little thrusters. I like that combination of the great big giant thrusters, and then dotted in amongst them you find some of the smaller thrusters. And we know, looking at that little grouping of 4 thrusters on a ship this size, they aren't going to be contributing substantially to the speed of the ship. That's not why they're there. They're there because they'll look a little bit more interesting and make this sort of central thing that we've built look more interesting, just because it's hard to beat glowy things when it comes to making things look interesting. So 4 little medium thrusters. The one thing that I used here that I had never used before was the hemispherical little cap piece. You can get, it's like a half sphere that you can place on top of any block, whatever you want. And in this case, putting it right in the middle, in between those 4 medium thrusters, it was just that little bit of icing on the cake that wound up being something that I was pretty pleased with. And I'll have to keep that in mind for future considerations, that yes, that block does in fact exist, because there are still blocks that I have not used in this game. And it's good because I can always, experiment with something new, but at the same time, what else could I have done with some of these blocks that I never even thought of before? So experiment when we have the opportunity, and in this case it happened to work out. This part here that I'm doing is just extending in between the thrusters from that central portion, and again, it's just adding a little extra 3D to something that would otherwise be very, very flat. Now, I'm not going to show you the completion of this whole back end, because you've seen almost half of it, and the other half is just going to be duplicating what we've done already. So I'm going to do that behind the scenes, and you'll of course have an opportunity to see what it looks like when it's complete. But you kind of get the general idea of where we're going with the whole thing. Is we're basically anywhere where it's flat on this back end is a candidate for revision and being updated so that it's no longer flat, that it has a little bit more visual interest. Not necessarily the same pattern being duplicated on the top groups as the bottom ones. You can see this lower arm here that I'm doing the perfectly, the one that's parallel with the ground, is going to have a different profile compared to the one that's 45 degrees above it. So we'll be kind of keeping that in mind as we go, trying to make sure that they aren't so radically different that one stands out over the other and people kind of look at it and almost pick which one they like better. We want to avoid that sort of scenario. but at the same time, trying to get them exactly the same, just the way things go together, matching something that's at a 45-degree angle with something that's essentially at a 0 or a 90-degree angle can be a little bit tricky, a little bit trickier than you might expect. So I'm just kind of taking it as I go and giving myself liberty to do things a little bit differently. So the next episode, we're going to have more details underway. More of the ship will be textured, even though you probably won't have a chance to see it all. But it'll probably start looking more like a completed ship, and give you guys sort of a general idea of where we're going. And then the run up towards the end will just be a flurry of details and painting and texturing and final little things that we have to finish in order to make everything work the way that it's supposed to. And then there'll be a blueprint. So if you want to be notified about the next and future episodes, the easiest way to do that is to subscribe to my channel or follow me on social media. Links for social media are always in the information section below the video. Feel free to leave your comments and feedback. Thanks for watching, guys, and take care.